Hey guys, today we'll be looking at the flip fluid world settings and comparing how the viscosity, surface tension, and sheeting variables will shape your simulation. Let's get started. Thanks for tuning in to the second part of the flip fluid series. In the first half of this tutorial, we're going to be creating this warm caramel flow over a candy bar. I'd recommend to not do this tutorial on an empty stomach, or just be sure to have no candy in arm's reach, or else that might get eaten. Let's jump in. All right, so I am using Blender 3.3, and I just updated to the most recent version of the add-on, which is currently 1.5 and was released on September 7th, 2022. So in my scene, I'm starting with a candy bar. It's modeled closely to scale, as you'll see up here. And then I've deformed the cylinder, and it animates over top of the candy bar at kind of a medium slow speed. This will be our inflow object. And the domain I've created has been scaled to the distance that our inflow will travel. Because I know the end result, I want this fluid to kind of flow slowly, so I'm not too worried about overexpanding the domain. And I plan to use the bottom face of the domain as our ground plane. I will assign our objects, domain, inflow, and obstacle. And for now, we'll keep all the default settings and take a look at what we have. All right, there are many issues right now. Our inflow is stuttering, the sim is too fast overall, and we certainly don't want this watery caramel drizzle. So let's solve those. I'm going to reset the bake. Let's raise the resolution to 120 for more detail on our fluid. In our domain, I'm going to change the simulation method from flip to APIC. As the tooltip reads, I'm doing this because the scale of our simulation is very small, and this sim method is actually better for that scale and should allow it to be more stable and smooth for our caramel. Now we'll scroll down to speed, and let's change that to 0.5 so the sim runs slower. To solve the inflow jitter, we're going to play with two settings that work together. In the domain advanced settings, we're going to increase our minimum substeps. This, in relation to our inflow, will allow our fluid to be calculated more times between each frame. So let's change our inflow substeps to 4 and the frame substeps to 2. I'm also going to lower our max substeps because I don't want any interactions to be that calculation intensive. All right, with all those changes, let's take a look. All right, our inflow is much smoother. Most of that jitteriness is gone. And then let's move to shaping the fluid. I'll reset again. And in our domain world settings, you can see 3 variables that are currently disabled. We have viscosity, surface tension, and sheeting effects. Each one of these can drastically change the motion of the fluid particles. And the best way to describe their effects is to show them. So first up, we have viscosity. In this comparison, you can see 4 examples. The first set is the default world settings with no viscosity, and then the others increase from 0.01 to 0.1 and then to 1. I've included both the top and side views for each setting so you can fully appreciate the change in fluid motion. The viscosity value correlates to how much a fluid will resist deformation. So at the value of 1, the fluid has a very little or slow deformation per frame and appears to be like a Play-Doh or toothpaste consistency. Before we continue to the other variables, I want to let you know that these comparisons have been uploaded as a standalone video on our channel so that you can reference them in the future. I know this is something that I find very useful, so please check those out after this video. Secondly, we have surface tension. This value correlates to the fluid's surface particles and their ability to stay connected to each other. As the Flip Fluid wiki suggests, this value helps form beads and drips. Here we have a value of 0, 0.05, 0.15, and 0.3. Now, these are lower values because this setting can change quickly. And lastly, we have sheeting effects. This is different than the other values because this allows the simulation to actually create new fluid particles where gaps are present. In the case of our comparison, the higher sheeting values fill in the holes that our splash action created. This effect has 2 main values: strength, which changes the rate at which gaps are filled, and thickness, which dictates how thick the filled gaps will be. These are all very fun settings, so as always, play around and check them out on your own. All right, back at it. For the look we want to create, we're going to focus on the viscosity setting, and we'll touch these other two in the next part. I'm going to start with a lower value of 0.08, and let's take a look. Okay, so with that change, we are running into the inflow issue again. So I'm going to increase the substeps for both the inflow and domain settings one more time. And let's bake. Okay, this is much closer to what we want with the fluid folding. Let's reset, and I want to change the scale of our simulation. This change will adjust the realism of our simulation, but it's another way to shape your fluid. So by increasing the scale to 2, I'm suggesting the fluid will move as if it were twice the size that it actually is. And I'm also going to lower the speed just a touch. All right, even better. Now the fluid deforms slower and folds a little nicer, so I really like that. Now, if you are concerned about the fluid surface that you see here, you can always apply modifiers to adjust the look of the surface at the end of your simulation. My final change is going to be to add some friction to the candy bar. This will help slow the movement of the fluid after it lands on the candy bar. And here we are. This is exactly the look I want. I think it has a pretty appetizing look. After adding some textures, lighting, and some modifiers to our surface, this is our final result. All right, next up, we're going to be using this add-on to create this energy drink artwork. This could be used in motion, but I also like this as a still example for print or web. So let's get to it. Starting out, we have a soda can, and I'll have a link in the description below to where you can download this. Let's create a domain. I'm going to scale this down a bit, and I'll leave it to the side because I want the can to be animated from left to right later on. And I'll rename this domain. And now I'm going to add obstacle and inflow objects. I'll rotate and scale this cylinder. And then I'm going to place it up in the domain. And then I'll use a cube for the emitter, and I'll scale this down and move this above the obstacle. I'm going to rotate it slightly to change how the fluid starts out. I'll apply the transformations for both objects, and then apply our fluid objects, domain, obstacle, and inflow. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm going to add an outflow object at the bottom of our domain. This will remove excess fluid and particles after they leave our view of our camera, and that should help speed up our simulation. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so this is a good start. Before we start shaping the fluid a little further, I want to animate our can and bring that in as an obstacle. I'm going to animate it to move over and up, and then rotate it slightly along the way. And I also want to slow the fluid motion down for the collision, so let's bring that speed to 0.5. Okay, so in order to have this can be an obstacle, it needs to be watertight. And on download, this can is made from a few different parts. So one easy way to fix this is to create a proxy mesh to use for your simulation, and then keep the high-res version for rendering. So what I like to do is duplicate and parent the proxy to the high-res version, and I'll remove the keyframes. And then to make the proxy, I'll use remesh to create a new watertight mesh while maintaining the shape as I lower these values. And then once that's done, I'll decimate to lower the face count. This may not be the best way, but it's the route I like to take. All right, I'll make this an obstacle object. and then I'll increase the sim resolution to 120 and bake. Okay, so why isn't the can interacting? Well, it's because the simulation isn't taking into account the movement of the object. In the obstacle settings, we need to enable export animated mesh. So now the simulation will first calculate that movement and then simulate the fluid. And now when we sim, the can interacts correctly. Now I want to change the shape of our collision so that the fluid wraps around the can in kind of a more pleasing way. And we can achieve this using the tension and sheeting variables. If you want to refer to the comparison earlier, please check the chapters. But we'll start by enabling sheeting with a strength of 0.25. And let's watch the difference. So this isn't exactly right yet, but it is creating a more exciting splash with the can. I'm going to reset and now add the surface tension. And we'll start with a value of 0.05. And now when we bake, you may be thinking this is further away than where we were before. But I like the tension, and I just want to change the scale of our simulation to bring the fluid motion back. All right, let's bake again. And this is great. There's a powerful splash when the can comes through, and should allow for some fun lighting and material styles later on. Before we call this sim final, there's a couple things I want to do. I'm going to change the simulation resolution to 200 for a little more detail. I'm going to add whitewater particles, and then I want to increase the sheeting a little bit, so we'll raise that to 0.5. All right, after that sim, we have much more fluid detail and a nice spray of whitewater particles. I'm gonna add materials and lights, and let's take another look at the final result. So as you can see, I made the whitewater particles, these tiny balls of water splashing around, and I did apply some modifiers to smooth the fluid surface a bit. Between both the examples of the can and the candy bar, I hope you saw that with a very short amount of time, you can create some pretty cool things and add to your 3D scene. I hope, like me, you've learned something along the way. Thanks for watching, and if you have any comments or questions, please drop them below. And if you did enjoy the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Stay tuned for more Blender videos, and we'll see you next time.